back here now on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to talk more about trades. And one trade that already happened is L'Jarius Sneed being traded over the weekend to the Tennessee Titans. The details on the trade were that the Kansas City Chiefs sent L'Jarius Sneed to the Titans for a 2025 third-round pick and a 2024 seventh-round pick swap this year. So initially, when you see that, you might think it's really not a lot for L'Jarius Sneed, who had an amazing regular season and an even better postseason with some of the plays that he made. The biggest one, most notable one, just for me, is the play he made on Zay Flowers in the AFC Championship game, where he punched the ball out just before Zay Flowers reached the goal line, changing that whole dynamic of the momentum, the drive, and resulting in a touchback, saving the Chiefs from conceding those points. It made a big difference in the game, obviously, with how the second half turned out in that game, sending the Chiefs to a Super Bowl and ultimately winning them their back-to-back Super Bowls that they had. And the biggest question with Sneed and the Chiefs really this offseason was to really decide between two of their best players, more impactful players in Chris Jones and L'Jarius Sneed. Both of them deserved and were asking for a big contract based off of the results and all that they have done for the Kansas City Chiefs. Whether you think Chris Jones or L'Jarius Sneed was more important, that's up to you. I think most people would say Chris Jones, in all honesty, as would I, because of what he meant, because of the play he made in the Super Bowl there to save a touchdown that the 49ers, I thought, had a walk-in with George Kittle, but because Chris Jones was in Brock Purdy's face, that pass was incomplete and they had to settle for a field goal. Those kind of plays, I think, really were what made the difference for the Kansas City Chiefs in deciding to keep Chris Jones. They signed him to a massive deal towards the start of free agency, and they franchise tagged L'Jarius Sneed, which in theory would keep him here for another year, but mutually behind the scenes they agreed to look for a trade for L'Jarius Sneed if they couldn't come to terms on a long-term deal that satisfied his needs for money and financial reasons. And that's where we end up now at this trade that sends him over to Tennessee. And it was reported that the Tennessee Titans would agree to a new contract with Sneed that would be a 4-year, $76 million contract with them, $19 million per year, and $55 million of the 76 being fully guaranteed. Now L'Jarius Sneed becomes the third highest paid defensive back in the NFL, just behind Jair Alexander and Denzel Ward, who make $20 or $21 million per year. So he jumps right up to the top of that leaderboard. He's only 27 years old, so a 4-year deal isn't really a bad investment, in my opinion. He's really in the prime of his career now, and based on how well he played, I think it made all the sense for the Tennessee Titans to trade for a player like him. I'm liking what the Tennessee Titans are doing, adding L'Jarius Sneed to that defensive back room that wasn't the best last season, and now they brought in Chidobe Awuzie from the Cincinnati Bengals. They kept Roger McCreary, who was a high draft pick a few years ago. They got rid of Christian Fulton, who signed with the Los Angeles Chargers. But those three, L'Jarius Sneed, Awuzie, and McCreary, I think is a solid core to build around. Obviously, you want to have more depth, quality depth around those three, but having those three as your main guys, I think is a big improvement than what they had last year, on top of other superstars that they have like Jeffrey Simmons, bringing over Kenneth Murray to replace Azeez Al-Shaair, who signed with the Houston Texans, is also big. So they kind of got a little something going there for the Titans. I like their additions on defense now with Sneed rounding it all out. On offense, it doesn't go without saying that they signed Calvin Ridley, obviously, to that massive deal. And adding him to DeAndre Hopkins, they signed Tony Pollard. They signed a new center in Lloyd Cushenberry as well. So they made sure to revamp that offense, kind of modernize it a little bit. I talked about it a few weeks ago as well. The new identity that Brian Callahan wants to bring over to the Tennessee Titans as their new head coach, I think it's good for them, which is funny because if this was still Mike Vrabel and he brought in Calvin Ridley And not so much L'Jarius Sneed, but the way he played, smash mouth, in your face, running it at least 25 times a game, I wouldn't think those pieces fit. But because Brian Callahan is coming from a pass, vertical spread offense like the Cincinnati Bengals with Jamar Chase, Joe Burrow, Joe Mixon, T. Higgins, all these weapons, I think he's bringing that idea over to the Tennessee Titans, and I think it's good for them because I like how Will Levis finished off the year last season. I think he's shown great potential. Now they add to that and that sort of ceiling that he's built out or that he's projected to have. I like the way that they're moving. And if I were to deem a winner of this trade, for right now, I'm saying, because of how the teams sit right now, I would go with the Titans because they got better in this trade. The Chiefs undisputedly got worse. They lost their best corner. You can't say that they got better or stayed the same. The Titans got better. They didn't give up too much to get L'Jarius Sneed. And the only question around this move for the Titans, in all honesty, would be the amount of money they paid him because they paid so much already for Calvin Ridley. And Calvin Ridley is 30 years old already, so you could question that decision-making there. But just on this trade, looking at what each team gave up and what they got, I think the winner is the Titans quite clearly because they got better, in all honesty. And for the Chiefs, they could become the eventual winner. That's the caveat. Because they freed up $20 million of cap space, that's a lot of cap space by getting rid of L'Jarius Sneed. If they were to add someone pretty big, like a Tyler Boyd or Xavier Howard to replace L'Jarius Sneed, then I might change my vote a little bit and say that the Chiefs, playing the long game, they were the winner. But in the short term winner is the Tennessee Titans right now. And like I mentioned, they owe a lot of money to Ridley and Sneed, so I think that only adds a bit more pressure for them to perform under Brian Callahan and with Will Levis. I have confidence in that they will do that. I like the way that Cincinnati ran their offense. They had a lot of success with Callahan and Joe Burrow and all the weapons. So the fundamental idea is there. I like what they're building. They just have to add a bit more to it right now to rough up those edges and really make this thing look sharp. Because you lost such a big playmaker like Derrick Henry, and he was really the whole offense or your whole identity on offense, it's going to take some time to switch over now to this idea that Brian Callahan has, especially with a young quarterback now trying to learn a whole new playbook, a whole new system with a new head coach and stuff like that. It's going to take some time, but I always will side to modernizing, not being so rigid with change and sticking to traditions. As a Pittsburgh Steelers fan, I know that's all that they're based on and what they really can't switch off of. So the way that the Titans are doing it, and to the Steelers' credit a little bit now this offseason, I've mentioned how aggressive that they've been. It's refreshing to see. I think Tennessee Titans fans will share that same sentiment and embrace this change that's coming with them. L'Jarius Sneed is a huge addition to their team. I'm sure he's going to make this thing really click on defense, where they still need to add a few more pieces, in my opinion. The secondary looks better now with all those players that I mentioned, but last week I talked about some of the big free agents left on the market, and one of them was Jeffrey Simmons, and where he could end up in all of this. I mentioned the Colts as one of the teams. I think I picked the Colts to be the most ideal situation for him because I didn't think Julian Blackmon was coming back. It made sense to bring in a safety, more experienced, to just fill in right away there for the Colts. But now I'm looking at this Tennessee team, and it's looking a bit more intriguing than the Colts. It's within the same division, but the Colts really haven't made as big of moves to improve their team. They brought back Michael Pittman, which was huge, gave him a new deal. But other than that, just comparing the two teams, I think if I were Justin Simmons and I am 31 years old or 30 years old, I'm looking for success right now. Coming out of the situation with the Denver Broncos, you don't really want that. I'm not saying the Colts are that, but they're a lot closer to that than the Titans are right now, in my opinion. It would make sense for Justin Simmons now to really consider the Titans to be a team that takes him up at least for a year. I think a year or two would be a good deal for the Tennessee Titans to sign Justin Simmons because he'll be a bit more expensive just because of his contract and the sort of player that he is, a more established player in the league. So I think that's one option that they could go with. They also need pass rushers, and they hold the number 7 pick in the draft this year. A lot of mocks have them drafting an offensive tackle, which would make sense to add to that offense. If you're not going to have Derrick Henry gaining you those extra yards, you need to make sure that offensive line is really good for Tony Pollard. To see the success you had with Tony Pollard 2 seasons ago that he had with the Dallas Cowboys, not so much this past season. So that would be another option. But if this all works out and they add the right pieces, they could trade back, which I wouldn't hate also. That's the growing theme on this show. I'm a big fan of trading back. I've just now come to realize I've suggested that to all these teams. But, that would be an option. At 7, Joe Alt is an option. DJ Turner is an option if they want to do that. For right now, I like what the Tennessee Titans are doing. And for the Kansas City Chiefs, I mentioned, they got worse. And that's not necessarily a bad thing because they got worse on defense. Overall, as a team, yeah, you can say that. But by worse, I just really meant on defense. And what's funny about the Chiefs is that they won the Super Bowl with a team that a lot of people would say was the worst that Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid have had in that whole era with Patrick Mahomes. And now, I think this Chiefs team, the best that it can be is that when they have a solid defense, they don't have to be shut down and all world like they were last year. But if they're decent, able to get a stop here or there and allow less than 20 points, 21 points per game, and this offense gets better, that's the biggest thing, with Marquise Brown coming in, and I expect them to add another receiver in the draft. If this offense gets better, quite frankly, they could only get better. I think that's the best version of the Chiefs that we could see. In just all my time watching them, they've seemed the most unstoppable, most dangerous when their offense has all these weapons. Patrick Mahomes is just throwing it all over the field effortlessly, not getting touched. They have a good offensive line now. They've improved that wide receiver. I know they got worse on defense, but that's really where I see them be their best version. A decent defense and an offense that just has all these weapons. They already have Pacheco. Rashee Rice look great. Travis Kelce, you know what you're going to get out of him. I think Marquise Brown will be good for them to stretch the field out. And if they could add another receiver, whether it be Tyler Boyd, like I mentioned, or Xavier, I'm going to get his name wrong. Is it Weaver? Xavier Weaver from Texas? I can't believe I'm drawing a blank. But the receiver from Texas, if they can get him, that would be great for this offense. It'll bring them back to what they sort of had with Tyreek Hill. It might take a while to develop it, but it would really increase their chances, I think, to be that unstoppable, just unplayable team that we saw a few years ago when they first won their Super Bowl. And in that aspect, really you could say neither of these teams really lost too much. If you had to give an answer, I would say the Chiefs. But for right now, I think this was the best thing for both teams. Similar to Justin Fields and the Chicago Bears, it just came to a point where it had to happen, and you just had to take the offer that was there. Getting 2 picks like that isn't the worst for the Chiefs. They could use it. Knowing them, they'll turn that 3rd rounder or 7th round pick into a superstar in that offense under Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes. I think it worked out best for both of these teams. I'm excited to see how the Chiefs look, and even more so what the Tennessee Titans look for and look like this upcoming season. But enough on those two teams. I will shift now into the second break of this show, and on the other side of it, I'm still going to stick on the topic of trades, this time talking about the Philadelphia Eagles and their situation with Hassan Reddick, how a trade could be coming down the pipeline in a few weeks, or in a few days now actually, as well as my reactions to J.J. McCarthy's pro day and how he impressed all the scouts and coaches that attended his pro day. So much more coming up on today's episode of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. Don't go anywhere.